Are you an accountant with a continuing education requirement? You can earn free NASBA-approved CPE for listening to this episode. Just visit earmark.app in your web browser, take a short quiz, and get your certificate.
Hey folks, Caleb here with another bonus episode. As I've mentioned before, we're trying a few new things in the post-Greg era. And this bonus episode is with Omri Mor. He's the co-founder and CEO of Routable. This is one of the new things. Routable, as you may have noticed, is one of our regular sponsors this year. And David Leary, one of the Earmark guys, asked if I'd like to talk to him. And I said, sure. You know, they're sponsoring the pod for the entire year. So, you know, why not? Now, I've been in media for a while. And if you've been following me for a while, then you know that I ran Going Concern for a long time. And during the time that I was there, even though I was an editor and writer, and that's what my job was, the publishing side, you know, salespeople, publishers, would ask me to meet with potential advertisers all the time. And I wasn't always very excited for these meetings, if I'm being honest, but I wanted the business side to succeed, so I would go. You know, I like to do favors. And, you know, sometimes I was helpful and sometimes I wasn't. But part of the reason that I wouldn't be very excited is a lot of times you would have meetings with people, sponsors, advertisers, and sometimes buyers sometimes you wouldn't even be talking to the people you wouldn't be talking to somebody who was at the company that wanted to advertise. You'd be talking to an advertising buyer. And so they didn't always know what they were buying. You know, Going Concern was this like specific thing, and they wouldn't really know anything about it, or they would be only vaguely familiar with it. And their expectations would be, you know, I don't know, basically the same. They just had the same kind of expectations across wherever they were advertising, which was sometimes really unreasonable. And, you know, so they'd run ads on the site for 3 months and they'd wonder why they got 0 leads or they only got 3 clicks. And I'd be like, look, ads on websites are not how people buy things. You know, this is not how the internet works. No one thought about like brand awareness and how, you know, how sites like that or a podcast like this, you know, people didn't think about brand awareness really back then, at least the people I were talking to, which says something about, I don't know, maybe the people that we were working with, who knows? Anyway, nobody thought about like the effectiveness of their advertising kind of in that context. They just wanted clicks or leads, or they obviously wanted sales. But anyway, you know, Routable doesn't really fall into this category at all because they're a great fit for us. And if you listen to the show, you know that bogus invoices are involved in lots of frauds, and Routable's product has a ton of features to help find suspicious stuff, you know, on invoices that may not, you know, be legitimate. So yeah, I talked to Omri. You know, he's an entrepreneur. He's a very smart guy. His brain moves, man. I felt fortunate that I could even keep up with him. I don't know if I did keep up with him the whole time, but I enjoyed it. I think he enjoyed it, and so I hope you enjoy it. And yeah, that's kind of it. So here's me and Omri Mor, co-founder and CEO of Routable. Thanks for coming on. And you know, thanks for, you know, sponsoring the podcast. I don't know if you make those calls or not, but you're paid.
I luckily have a very good team and do a lot of research, you know what I mean, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
And it's just about trying to find something that is authentically relevant.
Yeah, honestly.
This is right there.
Where'd you grow up, Omri?
I grew up in Tel Aviv.
Okay. What was that like?
I love it.
Yeah.
I mean,
amazing. I've never been, but I hear it's an amazing city.
Loud, obnoxious, flamboyant, delicious, tumultuous. I think it's like it's a place to grow up with such a heartbeat, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
You know, you grow up as a kid with the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Of course.
Right in your face. But the upside is that the good is so good that it's it's a place that I love to call home, and it's a place that I sincerely love to go back to. And it still feels like it was when I was a kid.
Oh wow, that's
Yeah.
oh my god. See, I grew up in a small town in the middle of the country, and I only feel anxiety when I go there. And it's and it's not in Israel. You know what I mean? It's just like it is a perfectly safe place, but I have lots of anxiety when I go there. But anyway, well, that's what I said. What'd your folks do?
My dad grew up in a kibbutz, which is a farming community
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of nowhere in Israel. He taught himself how to wrote code for a bank, and then started working for Microsoft Israel in the early mid 90s, or even before then. I remember going to Microsoft Israel as a kid all the time, like every day. It's
Yeah.
probably not every day, but my recollection was that I was just hanging out there as they were trying to get it off the ground. And my mom uh, currently still works at Microsoft, and she
Wow.
worked at MSN Israel prior to us immigrating to the
Was
United
she
States.
also did she also code?
No, my mom is a business and data mastermind,
Okay.
and I get 99.4% of my work ethic from her.
Oh.
So she
And
is she still works as many hours as I do today, and she's a force. So very amazing woman.
awesome. You have siblings?
I do. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. My youngest brother is the smartest person in our family by a landslide. However, he assumes that everyone is dumber than him and makes it obvious. So that one's a fun one. But
I mean, yeah,
he's
he
brilliant.
sounds very charming.
You know what? He has a strong attitude. He wears it proudly, and he rocks with it. And then my sister is much younger than me, and she is like the most even-keeled person in our family. She's, I think, just exploring life in a good way. She's
Yeah.
learning architecture. I don't think tech is her thing, and very focused on culture. She went to London to learn architecture.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So how did so then growing up, so technology was obviously in your life early
24/7.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, early on. And so did it dawn on you as a kid? You're like, "Oh, this is something I can do." Or was it just or
Mm,
did it feel abstract even then?
no, I think that technology was very native as a kid. My mom said that when I was in kindergarten, she would send me like home with donuts. One of the Jewish holidays you get donuts on.
Yep.
And that, sorry, she would send me to kindergarten with donuts, and I would trade them for other people's lunch. So I think that more than anything, I've always had a knack for figuring out a tiny advantage in life, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense,
Mm-hmm.
and exploiting it even as a little kid. Um, the funny thing is that I probably didn't get into hardcore tech startups until I was 18, where probably like 95% of my interaction was with software.
Mm-hmm.
And my level of frustration with software had become so high. And, when you're 18, 17, you're, an angsty little teenager, and you think you can do everything better. And that was my first, dabble into startup land. And I loved it.
Yeah.
It's,
That's when you started your first business.
I wish.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, I started my first business when I was like 20, which is not that far away. Um, that said, I remember I worked at a startup while I was at school, and I was just shocked by how chill everybody was, how smart everybody was.
Mm-hmm.
That I remember our CEO at the time, the founder, would be a great, like he would tell the funniest jokes every Friday at all hands. But it was about a community, a culture, a mission, all these things. And I work hard. I don't want to work without purpose, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And very, very early on, at like 18, I said, wow, I am the youngest person here by maybe 15 years. However, everybody respects me, and they're constantly asking me for help. And that is a riveting experience as an 18-year-old, because otherwise you're just told to learn, 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 and do, right?
Right.
So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Interesting. And what was that? What was that first business? Like, what was the
Yeah,
nature of it?
it was do you know Reddit?
Of course.
It's not Reddit, but do you know how you can upload things on Reddit and solicit
Sure.
feedback?
Yeah. Right.
That's all we did as a service. So like we built, it was kind of a Reddit as a service where you can allow any website to add an upvote
Okay.
forum. And one of our first customers was the White House. And the White House was using it to solicit feedback from the general population on things that it was considering doing. And that was really cool. I remember
Yeah.
Adidas was our customer too. And when you're exposed into solving real problems and giving people voices as a young kid, you're like, technology is cool.
Yeah.
Like, get out of my way. Let me do this. Right.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Okay. What year was this?
This was 2009.
2009. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. It seems like I know the internet was around before the Obama years, but it feels like that's when the internet became part of politics in a real
It
way.
was. I remember specifically good friends of mine being recruited to work on the administration, and not just the administration, but the whole campaign,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think if you really break this down, to me, that was the first election in which software became a competitive advantage.
Right.
And
And data. Yep.
data marketing was no longer about door to door only
Right.
and picking up the phones. It was also about trying to access the person, represent the person, uh, link to the ideology. I think
Yeah.
now in 2025, we share too much data, right?
Yeah.
Now it's almost like, in the age of LLMs and AI and how much data we've shared with social media graphs over the past 20 years, they can almost tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
So now we're in the opposite spectrum of that. But yeah, those were fun times. Um, yeah.
Kind of adorable looking back on.
You know what? I think that the funny thing is that every 10 years or so, you are shocked by the state of technology.
Yeah.
Um, I always talk about it this way. I remember around 2013, I remember e-commerce was big,
Yeah.
and it wasn't big, but it was big to me.
Yeah.
And I remember there was Squarespace. I remember there was BigCommerce. I remember there was this thing called Shopify.
Yes.
And I don't think that anybody would have picked them back then to be the winner. That makes sense.
It
I,
does.
I,
Yeah. Yeah.
the best thing about the internet is that it's a just anybody's game, 24/7. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
all we're doing is vying for your time or your money.
Yeah. Things have a tendency to come out of nowhere. Like it feels like, even though I'm not on the platform, like TikTok feels like something that came out of nowhere. That all of a sudden it went from just kind of a on the fringes of social media to being the biggest website in the biggest app in the world.
Yeah. But if you think about it, ChatGPT, same thing,
Yeah. Right.
right? We didn't have it and now we have it. Um,
Yeah.
and but I think that what's really interesting is that I've seen probably 100 to 200 startup that have tried to promise you with an assistant, digital assistant that have failed miserably. And talking about TikTok, that's just a much better version of Vine,
Yep.
any way you want to slice and dice it.
Right.
So I think that, whenever things do pop, we overlook the skeletons that are along the way.
Yeah.
Um, but, you know, I teach a class at the University of Washington on building companies, and I have to remind the kids that there was an electric car company before Tesla that failed. There was a tablet that Microsoft released in like 2006 that failed.
Yep.
Now, you can say that Surface is actually very successful now, right? But the
Right.
iPad had to come first. Um, I think the beautiful thing about technology is that you will likely be displaced. And that's the number one thing you have to ask yourself, if my product didn't exist tomorrow, what would my customers do? And that's probably the best question for driving any company, period. Right. And I think that, like, even if you want to take that to Coca-Cola, what would happen if Coca-Cola ceased to exist? You can say the brand or the corporate umbrella. People would go elsewhere. You know,
Yeah.
it's a really good question when you're running a company. If my company stopped, what would happen to my customers? And I'm sure Facebook thinks about it, or now Meta. I'm
Mhm.
sure like Instagram is a part of it. Um, think about car companies. You know, think about Ford. What if Ford stopped to exist? A new F-150 would be built within 12 months by someone else, right? Um, it's just really, really interesting. And I think the age of technology makes it so you're always on the court and you always have to be aware. But that's a cool thing. That's what
Mhm.
makes it exciting.
Mhm. Yeah. So, how's Routable start? What's
Sure.
I'm asking you to jump ahead a little bit, but
No, sure. You
what's
got it.
kind of the origin story that leads you to that?
Um, my co-founder Tom and I meet for hummus to eat hummus.
Like regularly?
Uh, this is a good question. So in Israel, getting hummus with someone is like getting coffee,
Okay, got it.
except hummus is very filling. It puts you to sleep. You're
Yeah.
very lethargic and you start sweating. So the opposite of the effects of coffee, right? But it's very common. So my co-founder Tom and I um, are grabbing hummus, and my last company was acquired maybe 6 months prior. His last company was acquired 6 months prior. We had both built marketplaces.
Mhm.
And we talked about things that we hated doing at our last company, as founders would do. And we both had built so many internal tools for, oh, well, we need to do payments. Let's integrate Stripe. Well, we need to log that data in QuickBooks. Let's build a custom integration of QuickBooks. Well, we need approvals. Well, let's build that internally because neither of those two systems talk together well enough. We started kind of going through it and we're like, well, and then there's a migration to NetSuite, and then there's a move off of Stripe to Wells Fargo. And we realized that we both had experienced this. We're building a marketplace, and at the same time, because the amount of money we're paying out is high and high volume, and the amount of vendors that we're onboarding is high and high volume, we probably spent, I'd say, 30 to 40% of our time building internal tools and custom things for marketplaces. So we said to ourselves, cool, I wonder if this is just a marketplace problem, or is there a common denominator if you have to make X business payments a month, whether they're invoice backed or not, is it debilitating? Um, that was in Tel Aviv. We're getting hummus. We flew back to Seattle and began 9 months of research. We interviewed over 300 Office of the CFO personnel across about 450 conversations in 9 months. And we basically had enough confirmation that there is a threshold that if you send over 1,000 invoices a month, or sorry, if you receive over 1,000 invoices a month on the AP side,
Mhm.
and or if you need to make over 1,000 business payments a month, whether it's to a contractor or a supplier, there will be an extreme amount of inefficiency.
Mhm.
And I think at the time too, when we did the market research, we are like, well, Stripe is an amazing platform for moving money. Coupa was a market leader for enterprise. Bill.com was a market leader for SMB. And we really wanted to build something for a mid-sized company that was expecting to, I'd say, double or triple its money movement in the next 5 years. And that's where we saw our space to come in. We applied to Y Combinator. We got in. We moved to the Bay Area. We started writing code. We got our first customer within 10 weeks of starting to write code, which was really fun. Caleb, I remember actually going to their office and licking envelopes for checks. So we built an API to send checks because we
Yep.
didn't want to like envelope anymore. And Yeah, but then fast forward, it's been almost 8 years now.
And so, and you still have that first customer?
We do actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
See, that's a good
and
story.
and their CEO is one of our, but what is our COO right now?
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Yeah, like it's fun. Yeah,
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah,
Okay. So, so you're finding your spot, the timing's right. What is it about? Is there anything this we do a show about fraud. And
yeah. Let's do it.
so so what is it about, like you talked about inefficiencies.
Hmm.
To say that fraud is an inefficiency is probably a gross understatement. But like when you think about that,
Hmm.
what problem were you did you identify an obvious problem, or is it just kind of a collection of inefficiencies? Like what were you trying to set out to do when you were trying to solve those problems?
Oh, so I want to break it down. So a couple things. One, I think that this is a resourcing problem, like from a priority perspective,
Yep.
and an inefficiency problem. And you always have to think about it as invoice fraud, vendor fraud, and internal fraud. That's
Yep.
the way I like to break it down.
Yep. Sure.
I remember when we were interviewing the office of the CFO individuals for so accountants, controllers, CFOs,
Mm.
we met with a CFO who was tweeting that they're going on vacation because they were so excited.
Yeah.
And there was some hacker that was following them when they were on vacation. The hacker impersonated them,
Yep.
sent in invoices, said that they were priority, and I believe they lost $6 million in a week. Yeah.
Happens
So
that fast.
I think that the really interesting thing, so let's go talk about where we are in 2025. It is easier and easier and easier to want efficiency in the office of the CFO. You want to process invoice faster, you want to pay faster, you want to settle faster, you want to reconcile faster. I think that we're in a really weird thing where we're saying, well, we have technology, then let's cut the resources from the office of the CFO. Let's cut budgets. You should be able to do more with less.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing is, though, I don't know, and I've interviewed many of Fortune 5,000 companies, of many companies that have an internal um, forensic accountant.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to get to is the fact that fraud prevention is a reactive measure at companies after the fraud happens rather than prior to. Um, and we talked about this recently. Think of the process of recon and
Mm-hmm.
closing your books.
Yep.
So imagine that every month, so you're in your house, right?
I am.
Imagine that every month you had to take inventory of everything that was in your house and where it was placed. And that was your whole job. And that's all you got paid to do. The probability that you would be paying attention to the security of your house would be very low.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about the month end close and the audit process, we do not give the accounting team or the finance team a lot of time to think about their processes, augment their processes, or bolster them for security. We try to cut time, we try to cut resources, we try to cut budget. So I do think that we need to start, first of all, having the conversation of the reason we got into the fraud part of it is because we said, well, we're okay, we can read your invoice in about 15 seconds or less with
Mm-hmm.
extremely high accuracy. Like at some point, going to 1 second, it's going to plateau the effects of efficiency, right? We are using AI to learn how you coded all of your previous invoices,
Mm-hmm.
so you don't have to code anymore. Um, what I'm trying to get to, Caleb, is let's assume that you have 5 to 15,000 invoices per month as a company. At some point, you will get really efficient or not
Mm-hmm.
with processing your invoices. But for every new 1,000 invoices you increase, the probability of fraud also increases. And for some reason, We hire more people to do data entry. We spend more money on more expensive software, like old legacy software that
Yep.
doesn't give you any efficiency. Yet we never spend money on training people. We never spend money on buying insurance for this thing. And we don't, um, we don't, part of our audit isn't, we say, are you SOC 1, are you SOC 2, are you SOC 3 compliant? We don't say, are you good at fighting fraud? Show us your fraud prevention measures.
Right.
And it's a really weird thing think about a board mandate. We know, and I think we'll talk about this in a second, many beautiful, large, successful companies, they'll lose millions of dollars due to fraud because the investment isn't there. So you asked why, though. I remember one of our clients came to us and said, hey, can you help us figure out if this invoice is fraudulent? And I think it was for about $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to validate within a split second that it was fraudulent. And we gave them line by line, here's all the things that are wrong with it. And then we kind of started smiling because it was fun, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. At the end of the day, it's like trying to solve a puzzle. And we said to ourselves, okay, cool. What if we weren't not only the most efficient way to move money at scale, the most accurate way to sync data to your ERP, but what if we were the safest way to move money? And I think safe is, one, you don't want to send money to the wrong place, right? That's the obvious one.
Yep.
2, you don't want to experience fraud. 3, safe could be compliance. You don't want to mess up your 1099s. I think safety and compliance is a very broad spectrum, but it gave us the opportunity to get excited about a problem that you can solve with technology. And it was challenging, right?
It's one of those things where I think about it a lot, where because of human nature, fraud is something that it's as old as time, or as old as man, I suppose. Our ancestors, they were probably defrauding each other in some way, huh?
For sure.
For sure. But
that's not a real goat, you know?
Yeah, that's not a real goat. That's right. But and so part of me thought, oh, is this just the cost of doing business for humans? And I don't know. Maybe it doesn't have to be. I mean, there's always the chance that we were just talking about this example earlier, and I'm going to ask you for an example in a minute, but we were talking
Sure.
about an example of where you've got a situation where, like you say, if it's a big company and management is the ones, and maybe we're talking about something slightly different if we're talking about, financial reporting fraud versus invoicing fraud or whatever. But, the human nature element is something that is always present, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then you have, safeguards put in place to prevent the human element from, not outthinking itself, but going against its better nature, let's say. But then you might have circumstances where someone with power within an organization says, I want you to do that anyway, or I'm going to do that anyway. And so it's a multifaceted problem. And you're right. I think that's part of it, what makes it extremely interesting. And I don't necessarily know where I'm going with this, but if this is something that it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the accuracy or the safety and the compliance, it's almost that it wasn't an afterthought, but you kind of stumbled on it later, and then you're like, oh, that's exciting. That's a new problem to solve that we can do. And then you kind of had your proof of concept with your customer, and you did it so quickly. And yeah, that must have been exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we've always thought about it, but as you build a platform, you got to build the basics first, and then you specialize second. And this was just a really fun opportunity to say we could do more for our customers. And we do have customers that come to us with a lot of money movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not uncommon for someone to come to us with, hey, I need to push anywhere from $10 to $100 million a month. So the way I'm thinking about it is, okay, well, going back to our initial conversation is what would our customers do if we no longer existed?
Yep.
And part of that question is how can we be a more reliable, sticky piece of software? And if you could tell your executive team that didn't give you budget for any fraud resources, that now your accounts payable platform has it natively and you don't have to pay extra for it, that sounds cool,
Yeah.
right? Um, I I just moved into a new house and I just installed cameras. Ring is a very
Yep.
I think the Ring doorbell is very much what this industry is missing, and that's what we're trying to provide. The Ring doorbell at a very, very base level was let me see who's at my front door. But at the same time, it gave you safety, it gives you recording. You know, um, Another example today, new cars have built-in 360 cameras.
Yep.
If someone dings your car, you can feel good about being able to prove the insurance. What I'm trying to say is that sometimes solving for safety is a nice little novel thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That all of a sudden reboots how you think. So if you have a car from before 2001, you're probably not convinced that you can prove your innocence in a car crash or if someone just scratched your car while you were shopping for groceries.
Mm-hmm.
Post 2001, it's almost a guarantee that the new car that you will buy will have 360 camera vision, right? And
Yeah.
will actively record it. Um, I do wonder what percentage of the American households now have a Ring camera,
Yeah.
right? Someone approaches your house, you have it. You
Yeah.
have their audio too.
Yep.
I think what I'm trying to say is that we stumbled into it, and the more we spend time working on it,
Mm-hmm.
the more it's funny that we didn't build it 5 years ago,
Right.
Caleb.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, I think technology is easier right now to implement overall as well.
Yeah. So you said you had an example that you wanted to share. So what's the example?
It was the $6 million one.
Oh, okay, you did. Okay,
Yeah, like
great. Yeah.
the tweet. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
That's right.
Like
Yeah.
think about being a CFO and saying, dang, I can't tweet. I can't post on LinkedIn. I can't communicate my intentions
Right.
because I'm a walking target.
Right.
And I don't think that the average CFO thinks about that,
Right. Right.
but
Right.
it's true. I think at the end of the day, it is true. For what it's worth, my coworkers get 1 million text messages every month from fake Omri. We have an emoji in Slack of fake Omri. It's evil Omri.
Oh, nice.
And it's almost like one of those things that everybody shares their evil Omri um, fraud text and fraud emails that we get sent in all the time, right? Um, I think like as a culture, we make it fun to find fraudulent activity
Yeah.
at our company. Yeah, and the fact that the team has a picture of me with horns and beaming red eyes really says everything you need to know about that too.
Yeah. All right. Um, all right. So I don't know, we have a few examples from
Yeah.
past episodes that maybe we can talk about. And maybe you can say, yeah, I mean, my hunch is that Routable would be able to stop most of these, but I don't know. So I guess
Let's find out.
Let's find out. Okay. So here's a quick recap. There's a small town in Dixon, Illinois. There's a small town in Illinois, Dixon, Illinois. This is a municipal fraud of like $53 million.
Mm-hmm.
And over many years, like over the course of like 20 years. And what she did was she siphoned funds from the municipality's accounts into a secret account that she had established at the same bank, but she just created an account that nobody else knew about. And then she started issuing invoices, like they were like mostly like sewer projects and things like that. And and they could make it payable to this secret account that she knew about. And then from there, she could move it to her personal account, and there she, spent millions of dollars on quarter horses and, all kinds of crazy stuff. Fancy clothes to wear while she's showing quarter horses, things like that. So anyway,
This
that's
is
a
really
really
interesting.
broad, high level version of the story. I'm just curious if anything's
Sure.
jumping out at you.
Well, first of all, you wouldn't have fake invoices. Even though they were fake in nature, they wouldn't be modified. Does that
Yep.
make sense? So
Yeah.
when you and I think of a fraudulent invoice, we think of a real invoice that was doctored with new information, kind of like digital whiteout, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
That's what we think about. But what you're describing, she was making real invoices for a fake company.
Yep.
Now, there's two things on how you solve that there. One is approval rules, right? And this is nothing that's unique to Routable, right? You just make sure that there's a proper approval hierarchy and controls of how we pay and why we pay each vendor,
Mhm.
right? Maybe maybe these invoices were flying under the radar because they're like under $1,000 and so forth.
Yep.
The other thing that we recently launched was the ability to verify bank account ownership, and that's where we would have probably flagged it.
Ah.
We now can say, hey, the legal name on this W-9, for example, we can collect a W-9 and then in real time talk to the IRS and say, is this a real company and owner?
Yep.
Now we can also say, does that legal name that was verified by the IRS own this bank account?
Yep.
I think that's where we would have started finding it, if that makes sense.
Interesting. It does. Yeah. Right. Okay. Very, very interesting.
But
All right.
sounds, I mean, bank account to bank account, I mean, she's creative. You got to give her props.
Yeah. I mean, she carried it on for 20 years. And
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the only way it was found was that her assistant was preparing for like a city council presentation, and she called the bank and said, I need all of our I need the statements for all our accounts. And so the bank, not knowing that she didn't know that there was this secret account where all that money was going, sent her this account. She picks up the statement of account she doesn't recognize, and it's got these huge numbers on it. And then she goes to the mayor and says, I've never seen this bank account before, and there's lots of money moving through it. And that's how they found it.
On that note, since we're on a podcast, I'm currently listening to a podcast called God's Banker. I don't know if you've heard it.
I have heard of it.
It's fantastic. And it's about fraud in the Vatican Bank.
Yes.
In the 1970s and 80s. And as someone who thinks about this all the time, it's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
It's what you just described, but across 8, I think, podcast episodes.
Oh, wow.
At a much grander scale.
Yeah, right.
With the mob and government agencies and everyone involved. It's like the hairiest mob story. I wouldn't say mob story, maybe fraud story there is. And Caleb, I'm just waiting for an HBO series on this to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're talking. Okay.
Now let's make this a fun conversation topic, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is. I think the thing that I was thinking about this. I think I was thinking about this today. I think fraud, like the more and more I read about these stories and research these stories and talk about these stories, is that fraud is such a human thing. And like one of our interviews from ages ago was a fraud professor, and she, ironically enough, she made a documentary about this case in Dixon, Illinois. Her name's Kelly Richmond Pope. And she said to Greg and I at the time, she said, everybody's got their number. And I was skeptical of that for the longest time. And I thought, there are people out there who can resist, doing the wrong thing because they know it's wrong. There are people out there. And I thought, I remember thinking, it's like, no, I think I would say a lot of people are that way. But if you put somebody in the right circumstances of their job, circumstances of their life, circumstances of opportunity, all that fraud triangle bullshit. I mean, it's not total bullshit. But the point is, what I'm saying is, if you put me in a situation and I'm desperate for money, but I have an opportunity and I can rationalize it to myself, like, Yeah, I'm probably capable of it given the circumstances. I also just read a book, Dark Matter, about it was about the multiverse, and so that's one of those other things. I'm like, oh, there's definitely versions of me in other dimensions that aren't probably doing fraud podcasts, but are maybe committing fraud. I don't know.
There you go. I mean, but Catch Me If You Can is a beautiful movie just on this,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
Um, I do think that what's interesting is that as a work culture, we've gotten better at people operations, trainings, compliance,
Yep.
stuff like that. But yeah, what's really still interesting to me is that in 2025, I do still think that the resourcing and the conversation isn't there,
Right.
if that makes sense.
I think you are.
Um,
I think I agree with you. Yeah.
it's like it's almost like I do love that we have the SOC standards and the ISO standards and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
It almost feels like if you're moving X amount of millions of dollars per month, you should be able to show exactly how you're tracking, auditing your money. We don't really have a standard for anti-fraud internal,
Right.
or here's my best effort to it, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another one. So here's the story. This is a recent episode we did, is about a finance director at the Yale emergency school of medicine, or how would you say that? School of medicine within, I don't know. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, it was at Yale Medical School. This finance director was buying mostly tablet computers, and this is a good one. She embezzled more that, well, she didn't really embezzle, but she fraudulently acquired like $40 million of equipment, mostly technology equipment, and then selling it on the black market and then keeping the money for
Yeah.
herself, right? Okay. Um, in that case, there was a purchase. She was subject to a purchase threshold. It was like $10,000, let's say. And so she deliberately she broke up her purchases so nothing would break the threshold. And that's how she was able to avoid at least another step, a higher level review.
Yeah.
So given those circumstances, what jumps out at you? Like what could Routable
I'm
do in a
surprised that
situation like
Yale
that?
doesn't have a procurement process. Like that's the first thing I heard about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just think about it. She would have to say, I'm ordering this many things. That's
Yep.
approved. Let's go get the invoice. So, you know what? As we keep talking about this, I'm just surprised at a lot of companies do finance like the Wild West.
Yeah.
And you just said that, I mean, Yale might have a procurement process, but maybe that department or that school doesn't.
Right.
And because they didn't institute it, there was no way to track budget. There was a way to track approvals per invoice, but not budget across vendors,
Right.
right? Um, and there was no, I mean, she was buying the right things. So there again, there was
Yep.
no fake invoice, and there wasn't even a fake vendors that she was paying.
Nope. Not a fake vendor. Nope.
I think my biggest question is, what platform was she using to do this? And in theory, for what it's worth, I just don't understand the recon side of it.
Mm.
It's one of those things that if you're doing your recon and you're closing your books and you're doing a quarterly audit, you would know very quickly where you're spending the money.
Mm-hmm.
But Caleb, it's really funny. I would say, hey, before you even think about Routable, think about implementing a procurement process. That would have been solved really quickly.
Right.
And here's the thing, though: a procurement process is more work, like straight up, any way you want to slice and dice it. So you might actually be able to make a very convincing case that you don't want to add a procurement process. That said, I think software is getting good enough where a procurement process is not that bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, but gee, and was she also she was the person paying for it too, right?
She was, to the best of my recollection, she was approving, like she could make those purchases
And approve them too
without
without an approval.
without an additional approval because you're just keeping it below the threshold.
We would have found out that the frequency in which you're paying this vendor is too common. Does it make sense?
Yep.
Like, I think we would have been able to say that typically other vendors in this category, you pay every 70 days.
Yep.
And this vendor, you're paying every other day,
Yeah.
right? Something like that. I think that we would be able to start sniffing in the right area, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And we would also be able to just really understand that funds are going there. I think the real big question though is, and this is more of going back to like month-end close and so forth, she was making real purchases.
Yep.
I wish, this is almost where I wish now I have to build a feature about the delivery of goods. Like, I wonder where she was shipping the goods. If she sent them back to Yale and just did it to a warehouse that nobody knew about, that is fascinating. And again, Caleb, you say everybody has a number, right?
Yep.
But at least we would be able to see some anomaly in frequency of invoices compared to the mean, if that makes sense, Caleb.
Yep.
And I wonder if we would also be able to detect that these are the only consistent payments that are going unchecked, if that means like without approval. Like what I'm trying to say is, let's say you needed an approval over $10,000, but you're making $400,000 of spend.
Yep.
In total.
Right.
That's where it's a very interesting, by a single person. That's where it becomes really, really intriguing.
Yep.
Right.
Like you could have invoices for 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, but over the course of 60 days, if it adds up to over $500,000, is that a second threshold trigger?
Yeah, I think so. Right. And I think that, like we have, one of our features is that if you onboard a vendor, we can enroll them in monthly compliance monitoring, meaning that we'll check their TIN and their watch list every month, just all the time. And if they update their W-9, we will let you know if anything is wrong. If they came on a watch list, we will pause transactions and so forth. So in theory, we're literally keeping track of the business entity and saying, is there anything weird? We'll pause your transactions. Please manually review and so forth. I think the same thing is for bank accounts. They add a new bank account.
Yep.
If they own this legal name, maybe it's a subsidiary of theirs and it's good to go, but please review it.
Right.
And yeah, we are thinking about, is the address on this invoice different than last time? Is the frequency of payment and so forth? But what you're describing is really interesting because, God, you guys should come over and we should build features together. I want to learn the more stories, the better. Because in theory, it is very easy to track that.
Yeah, right.
You can say that vendors in this GL account category should not have a spend. Because you might not catch it if you set up rules for specific vendors. If you have 10,000 vendors, you might never catch it. But if from a booking perspective, it's booked to a specific department or GL category, that might be the easiest way to do it. And Caleb, this is where we need to have a forensic accountant with us on this phone call about how we would do it. But I'm trying to think about the ways I would get around by vendor and the way I would get around by amount. But in theory, the cool thing about ERPs is that you have to book it to something.
Yep.
And that's where the irregularities start showing up. For example, if I'm booking it instead of an office expense to employee travel, right?
Yep.
That is obvious that it's weird to the user. So you've piqued my interest. That's all I want to say.
All right. Is that the perfect place to end?
I think that the Office of the CFO should request more budget for training and software for fighting fraud. I think that it is the easiest thing to ask for. There's enough data that businesses lose millions of dollars a year. And I think we've done a very good job supporting many departments that work with the Office of the CFO. And I think the 2020s are really the time to start spending time and money on empowering the Office of the CFO, the finance, accounting, FinOps, any department. I meet too many businesses that have a great business, have great customers, and deprioritize people in finance who I think are just amazing firefighters. They literally put out fires every single day.
Thanks, Omri. Okay, that was Omri Mor, co-founder and CEO of Routable. Maybe we'll talk again someday. I don't know. Like I said, I mean, we kind of at the end there we really got rolling, but he had to go, and I had to go. I had jury duty the next morning, and so I had to, I needed some shut eye. I had to get up early for that. Anyway, yeah. So if you are maybe in the market for a product like Routable, if those features sound good, the stuff that Omri was talking about sound good, check them out. It, might work for you. I hope it does. Anyway, let us know what you think of this episode. Like I said, it's a bonus. We've interviewed the CEO of a sponsor, which we've never done before, but we thought we'd try it, and we hope you enjoyed it. And if you got feedback, email us, ohmyfraud@earmarkcpe.com. And that's it. We'll see you soon.